Hi, it's Donna from the Ingalls Memorial Library, and welcome back for week 3 of Behind the Book Book Talks, which I might add is week 10 of a 6-week haircut cycle, hence the sombrero. This is what we had in the library, so this is what you get. Anyways, before I go behind the book for my book talk today, I thought I'd discuss with you for a minute how it is that books go from being objects on a shelf or in a magazine to being an object on my to-be-read stack. What makes them, what gives them that distinction out of all the hundreds of thousands of books that there are out there. Sometimes it's based solely on cover, and though I've been told my entire life, don't judge a book by a cover, sometimes I still do. Like this one, Good Grief by Lolly Winston. This cover is phenomenal to me. Fuzzy slippers, a bathrobe, a great title that kind of brought to mind Charlie Brown. Though the subject may not have intrigued me, the cover did pull me in, and I was very happy that I read the book. In fact, it actually lives on our staff picks display at the library. That's how happy I was with it. But again, based solely on the cover, did I pick this book up. Sometimes we pick a book because it's one of our favorite tried and true authors. Stephen King is one of mine, has been since I was 14 years old, and first read The Shining while sitting in an empty house on a rainy day in a lawn chair. If I can't decide what I'm going to read, if nothing really strikes my fancy, I will always pick up one of his books and reread it. I own every single one of them. Most of them I read more than once. There are a few that were kind of stinkers that I read once, and that was that. And I actually almost picked up The Stand because you really can't get a better pandemic story than Stephen King's The Stand. But I thought, maybe it's a little too early for that yet. I might pick it up in November, right when flu and cold season starts again. But if I can't pick anything else, my tried and true author is always there for me. Sometimes we pick a book because somebody whose opinion we respect recommended it, as was the case with This Tender Land by William Kent Krueger, which I reviewed in week 1 of this series. It was recommended by somebody who has very similar reading taste. I took a leap of faith, I picked it up, and I loved it. I'm very glad that I did, and I would highly recommend the book. And then sometimes it's something totally different. So this week, my choice was Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. And why did I pick this book? Well, when I was a kid growing up, I had a cousin who was Edward, whose name was Edward. He was never Ed or Eddie, he was always Edward. And he and his siblings, Edward was the middle child. There was Karen and Jean that were older, and Patty and Kevin that were younger. And they were my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Warren's children. My Aunt Ruth was one of my dad's older sisters. And many of our vacations and weekends were spent either at their house in Glen Burnie, Maryland, or at the farm that they inherited from Grandma Ham in Maine. And so many of my childhood memories revolve around time spent with that family. So when I saw this title, it immediately evoked memories of the family. And Edward was killed when I was in college in a motorcycle crash, long time ago. But as soon as I saw this title, I flashed right back to those days in the 60s and 70s, running around the farm with Rustus T the cat and Winston the dog and geese and outhouses and flashlight tag and everything. So for that reason, and strictly for that reason, I picked up this book. Well, Dear Edward. So this book is the story of Eddie. He starts the book as Eddie. He is a 12-year-old boy on the way from Newark to LA on a plane with his mom and dad and his brother Jordan, who's 2 years older. Mom is sitting in first class because she's taken a job on the West Coast writing a script, and she hasn't finished the script, so she sits in first class so that she can concentrate on finishing her job, while Dad and Jordan and Eddie are sitting in the back. And this all starts on June 12th of 2013. And on the flight, we meet the stewardess, who is like a stewardess par excellence, and men are crushing on her. We meet Florida, who's this lovely woman who's lived many lives and is in her current life is a large woman with a flowing skirt that has bells sewn into the hem, so when she walks, she jingles her little bells. We meet Benjamin, who was in one of the Gulf Wars and had a bad fight with one of his dear friends. He was injured both physically and spiritually during that fight. We meet Crispin Cox, who is was a high-powered, cutthroat kind of businessman, very wealthy. He's been married 4 times and divorced 4 times, and now is in a wheelchair and has cancer and is traveling with his nurse, or a nurse, not necessarily his nurse. We meet Linda, who has just discovered that she's pregnant and has been in a long-distance relationship with her boyfriend and is on her way to LA to tell him that she's pregnant, and in hoping that that he will propose to her. And there's many other people on the flight. So the book kind of goes back and forth between the day of the flight, and then into the future as Edward struggles. The plane goes down, and Edward is the sole survivor. And we kind of live through his coming to terms with that, with the guilt of being the sole survivor, and the questions that it answers, or the questions that it brings up in his mind. It's hard to describe. It's a beautifully written book, but I will read just a bit from the blurb at the front. And it says, when you've lost everything, how do you find the strength to put one foot in front of the other? How do you learn to feel safe again? How do you find meaning in your life? Dear Edward is at once a transcendent coming-of-age story, a multi-dimensional portrait of an unforgettable cast of characters, and a breathtaking illustration of all the ways a broken heart can learn to love again. And I guess that really sums it up. This book is beautifully written. She captures thoughts and emotions that you can only imagine, I think. And I think right now when everything is so topsy-turvy and people are so stressed and there's just so much going on that we just don't understand. This book, though we're not living through a plane crash or surviving a plane crash, it kind of spoke to me about the power of hope and connection. And Edward, who started the book as Eddie, has to learn to navigate the world that is totally unlike the world he thought he was going to have on June 11th, when his biggest fear was his stuff not getting to the new house in time. So I guess that's it. I picked this book because of the title and nothing else. And I don't know. Very few books these days find a place in my home to stay. And this is one of those books that I'm just going to have to purchase a copy of it and have on my shelf. And I will pick it up and read it and reread it, just as I do with Stephen King books. It was that powerful of a book. So I hope when we reopen, you will take my advice and take a chance on Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. I think you'll be glad that you did. So until next week, happy reading, stay safe, and we miss you at the library. Take good care.